I want to talk today about some myths. I think we know what myths are. They're pretty common with myths, urban legends, we might call them. They're statements that can't be proven as true, and yet they're told enough and circulated enough to where people start to buy into them. They think they are true. So some of my favorites are Walt Disney. He did not die, he was frozen. Have you heard that he's actually frozen, kept somewhere, just in case we figure out what's going to go on. That's not proven true. NASA found Joshua's last day, the missing day, where the sun was held still. NASA has said that they have found his missing day. KFC, they dropped the C. It's not chicken anymore. It's genetically engineered something. I'm not really sure about that one yet. I haven't looked into it. But they still have their C. I don't even know about IHOP. Is it IHOP? Is it IHOB? I haven't looked into that one. Is it burgers or pancakes? My favorite one, though, is Elvis. Elvis is still alive. I love the conspiracy with that. I mean, you look on Google, and there's pictures of him walking around some place in Nevada. He's still alive in some desert town. They're all myths, right? I mean, they're all legends, made-up stories that have been told enough and spun enough that people start buying into them. They believe them. Well, it shouldn't be a shock to us that there are myths about the church. Thoughts about the church that just aren't true, but they're told enough and shared enough to where a lot of people start to believe them. We're talking about a couple myths today related to the subject of large congregations, big churches. What does the Bible say about the size of a local congregation? I think we all can understand that this local congregation is to be considered large. Campbell Road Church is to be considered a large or a big church. The average size of churches in America are somewhere between 1 and 200. In fact, the average size, as I looked it up, is about 89. And so a church of 400 is considered pretty big. And you ask someone, if you ask a loved one and you talk about this local congregation and they hear how many members are here, you'll hear some things that are positive and you'll hear things that are negative simply because of the size of this church. The place we need to begin with this study, as with all studies, is what did God say about this matter? What's the Bible say about the size of a local congregation? You know, I think it's fascinating. There are some times when the size of a certain group or disciples is given to us. And so in Luke 12, when Jesus is teaching, it says, under these circumstances, after so many thousands of the multitude had gathered together, that they were stepping on one another. There were so many thousands there to hear Jesus, stepping all over each other. There's too many people in one space. You might remember in Acts 2 when the church began, Peter preached that sermon, and it says in Acts 2:41 that those who had received his words were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. And they were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and the prayer. 3,000, a number around 3,000. And we know from later on in this context that they who had believed were together. And so the implication is that a sizable group there from that Pentecost experience stayed together. So it would not be far-fetched to assume that local church in Jerusalem would have been several thousand members in attendance. We think 400 is big. Imagine 3,000. Can you imagine how long the Lord's Supper would take then? 3,000 before they had the little cups like we do? That's a big church. Acts 4, we read about how the disciples were continuing to increase, and it says that the number of men, not women, not children, it came to about 5,000. And so we get this. We get times when the Bible says, here's how many there were, here's a sizable number. But let's get straight to the question. What does God say? What did God say in His Word about the size of a local congregation? Know what He said? Nothing. Nothing. In fact, Revelation 2, right? When Jesus is giving his message to the 7 churches of Asia, there are things in these messages to these churches that Jesus points out and commends. He praises. And so, for instance, Revelation chapter 2 and verse 2, when he's talking to the church at Ephesus, he says, I know your deeds and your toil and perseverance, that you cannot tolerate evil men, and that you put to the test those who call themselves apostles, and they're not. You found them to be false. And you have perseverance and have endured for my name's sake and have not grown weary. You look over to Thyatira in chapter 2 when he says down in verse 19, he says, I know your deeds and your love and faith and service and perseverance, and that your deeds of late are greater than at first. And all across these letters, you'll see things like this, where Jesus will praise the heart of a congregation. He'll praise their commitment to truth. Here in Thyatira, he's praising their service, their love for one another. There are times in these letters when Jesus will correct these churches, point out things where they need to change. Back in Ephesus, and in verse 4 of Revelation 2, he says, this I have against you, you've left your first love. Down with Pergamum, down in verse 14, he says, I have a few things against you, because you have there some who hold the teaching of Balaam, who keep the teaching of Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel, to eat the things that are sacrificed to idol and to commit acts of immorality. And the same way in verse 15, you have some who hold to the teachings of the Nicolaitans. Even down at Thyatira, that church who was active in their love and their faith and service of God, it says in verse 20, I have this against you, that you tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess. She teaches and leads my bondservants astray so that they commit acts of immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. You see it, he's correcting their heart in Ephesus, their attitude. And these other churches, he's correcting their dangerous influence. They let walk right in their door. Here's the thing, brethren, though. In all these letters to each of the 7 churches, not once did Jesus mention their size. Not once did Jesus talk about the size of these churches, that they were either too small or that they were either too big. And maybe that's the commentary we need to pay close attention to. The things that we talk about the most about local congregations are often the things God said nothing about. I'll be honest with you. The number one question I get about this local church, how big are they? I got that question yesterday from my grandpa, and I've told him like 7 times, but he said, how big is that church? I asked Ricky. He said the same thing. The number one questions he's asked about this local church, how big are they? How many members are there? It's not, how spiritual are they? It's not, what work are you doing there in Dallas? What's going on there? No, just the size. And the thing is, if I were to say the Campbell Road Church is about 12 members, they say, oh, that's so small. We'll pray for you, and we hope that you grow. Keep on working. But if I say the Campbell Road Church is around 400, they say, oh, that's too big. That's so big. Why are you all so big? It's almost as if there's this ideal number in people's minds that churches ought to attain to. Here's the thing, good brethren. Let's start here. God has said nothing on the matter. Nothing about the ideal size, nothing about how big churches should get or how small they should get. All the confusion we have about the size of churches is not from what God has said, it's from what man has said. We need to start there. So what I want to do today is look at 4 myths, 4 common myths about big churches, large churches. Here they are. Here's number 1. Myth number 1. Big churches are liberal. Let's just put it out there. Big churches are liberal. I'm sure you've heard that before. It goes like this. The church is big, they're wrong. Why are they wrong? Because they're big. There's some people who believe that churches are wrong. They use that word liberal. Those who use words like conservative and liberal just don't know a dictionary. They don't know how to use those words correctly. But anyway, they use the word liberal. They'll say, that church is wrong, not because I've been there, not because I know what they teach, not because I know what they're doing. They're wrong because they're big. That's it. In fact, there's some people who assume churches can't get to that size. Churches can't get to a big size without compromising the message, without being soft on the truth, without replacing sermons with stories and jokes. Because the pure message of the gospel, you can't get that many people to come just for the gospel. Brethren, that's wrong. That's false. Luke 12, didn't we just read that? There were so many thousands gathered to hear Jesus, they were stepping on top of each other. Our kids are studying this quarter of the book of Romans. You remember how that began? Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes, the Jew first and also to the Greek. And so if there's someone today who is looking for salvation, if there's someone today who is looking for a second chance, looking for forgiveness, if there's someone today who's really looking for the truth, they'll come when that message is preached. They will come when that message is taught. And this congregation, we are committed to the truth. From the pulpit in our Bible classes, we teach the whole counsel of God. That means we teach the love of God, and we preach the wrath of God. We teach about hope and heaven and forgiveness, but we preach about sin and repentance and need to live a holy life. And so just to say churches are wrong because they're big, here's the truth of the matter. The rightness, or might we use the word soundness, of a congregation is not determined by a church's size. Here's myth number 2. Big churches are less friendly. This is the second most common thing out here, and that is 400. I don't think you can know anyone in that church. There's just too many people to get to know. How do you build any kind of close relationships in a church that size? And so the myth is, in a church that big, It's going to be really unfriendly. You're just going to be one among many. You're not going to have any real relationships in a church that size. And that, again, is a myth. Because the friendliness or closeness of a church is not dependent on its size. It's dependent upon the commitment of the members to build those relationships together. In other words, you can be in a church of 20 and feel absolutely alone because they're cold and cliquish and standoffish, and yet you can be in a church of 400 or 500 and feel at home and feel like a family and have many close relationships. In fact, one of the benefits of a big church is that you have a lot of members to have friends with. You have a lot more friendships and a lot more people to connect with. And so if the members are committed to what the Hebrew writer said, not just loving once, not just loving initially when you meet one another, but that love continuing among each other, if we're committed to loving one another, that's not dependent on how many members are here. That's dependent upon our devotion to one another and what the Bible teaches about loving each other as Christ is love. And so just to say that churches are big means they're less friendly, that's not true. That's not true. Here's myth number 3. Big churches have too many Christians fall through the cracks. That is, with so many people in that local congregation, you're going to have more people who are not noticed. And so some people are going to struggle, some people are going to drift, and they're just going to fall away and no one's going to notice it. And so you'll have people who are leaving the Lord and people who are getting neglected because there's too many people to pay attention to. Myth. You know why? This issue is not a size issue. This is a leadership issue. This is not contingent upon the size of a local congregation. People falling through the cracks, that's not because of how big the church is. That's because shepherds are not paying attention. When shepherds are more focused on budgets and buildings than they are the souls of a local congregation, you will have souls falling through the cracks. But when you have shepherds like we do in this local congregation, who take their job seriously, they're very serious about their job, and each of them are dividing this load evenly, so each shepherd has enough sheep to make sure that they can care for those and they're not overburdened, but they divide the load evenly, and they're watching and intimately involved with each of the souls. This is not going to happen. And so sheep falling through the cracks is not because the church is big. You can have a small church and sheep falling through the cracks. It's not a size issue, it's a leadership issue. And maybe that's the one commentary we could make, and that is a church will get too big when it outgrows its leadership. When you don't have enough leaders to divide the load, you will have sheep fall through the crack. But again, that's not a size issue as much as it is a leadership issue. That's about leaders paying attention to the sheep. They know their sheep and the condition of their flocks. Let's get to the last one. Big churches don't need more workers. They don't need me there. There are so many people. They don't need me. They've already got it done. They've got more than enough servants, more than enough workers. I would just sit on the bench. I'd sit on the sidelines. They don't need me there. That's not true. Let's start here. My service to God is not limited by what's done on this stage. Men, we need to understand that. Service to God is not limited by what's done here in worship up on this stage. And so what's done here leading in worship, it's not the only act of service, nor is it the most important act of service to God. What about evangelism? Reaching out to the lost? What about serving the needs of those in this congregation, helping the widows, mentoring the young, teaching Bible class, preparing materials, fixing things that are broken, providing rides to people who need rides, and on and on and on we can go. Is any of that done up here on stage? No. Is all that important work that can be done in this local congregation? Yes, yes. Look at this church, good brethren. In a couple hours, this building will be full, and we'll have 400 people here. That ought to tell us something. There's a lot of saints in this Garland, Dallas area who are interested in spiritual things. And it tells us there's a lot of people in this area who need to hear the gospel. And so if I'm interested in serving people, this is a great place to be. In fact, one of our deacons was sharing with me his story this week. And he was hesitant about coming here for this very reason. He said, I'm afraid I'm just going to sit on the sidelines. I'm not really going to be used. And there's a preacher of a smaller congregation who gave him this advice. He says, if you're interested in serving people, you need to be where the people are at. And so if the extent of my service is what's done up here on stage, then maybe I don't need to be here. But if I'm interested in serving God and serving people, helping people draw closer to Jesus, strengthening the souls, I need to be where those souls are at. And that's found in the local congregation. There's great needs, abundant needs, and we need everyone active in this local church. These are all myths. You see that on the board? They're myths. Most of these come from people who are either unfamiliar or just uncomfortable with the size of a local church, with big churches. But here's the thing, even though these are myths and they're not true, they certainly, though, illustrate some challenges that can come about from being a big church, some challenges that exist that we need to pay attention to. I think there's two challenges we, especially the Campbell Road Church, need to pay attention to. Here's number one. We've got to pay attention to keeping connected to one another, building real, genuine, close relationships, making sure that we are reaching outside of our social circles to engage with as many as we can. If this congregation continues to grow, as the Lord has blessed us with this year, we've got to make sure that we're reaching out and enfolding new members into this group and into our lives. That takes commitment to loving one another and real biblical fellowship, sharing with one another. In other words, we've got to get past the movie theater fellowship mentality. You know what happens when you go to a movie theater? I've been asked by a lot of young people if I see movies. I don't see movies anymore because I have kids and it's just not fun anymore. It's not the same. But there are a few times when I really want to see a movie. And what Holly and I have done is just a tag team where I'll go first and I'll see it, and then we switch at the door and she'll go in and she'll go see it. So here's my mentality when I'm at the theater. I find a seat that's by itself and I sit there and I watch the movie. And if someone comes next to me, I might say hi, I might do a nod, and that's it. If they want to talk to me during the movie, I get upset because I'm not there to engage. I'm there to do one thing, and that's to watch the movie. And in fact, if they keep talking, I'm going to move because I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to get to know you. I want to do one thing, and that's watch the movie. And sometimes that kind of mentality can come in here, where I'm here, and I'll say, hi, how are you? But boy, that's about it. And as soon as amen is done on that last prayer, that last song is done, I'm out because, I'm here, I've taken the Lord's Supper, I've checked off my box, but that's really about it. I don't want to get to know what's going on with you. I don't want to be plagued or burdened with your problems. I'm here, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, but that's about it. Brethren, we're not going to get close if that's the case. We don't know each other if that's the case. This isn't a family if that's the case. This is a club. This is a gym. This is a hobby. There's a passage Paul put to the brethren at Thessalonica, where he talked about their love for each other, brotherly love. He says, as to the love of the brethren, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you yourselves are taught by God to love one another. For indeed, you do practice it towards all the brethren who are in Macedonia, but we urge you, brethren, to excel still more. Do you hear what he's saying? You are loving each other, but you can do more. You can grow. And I think that's a message that Paul could have written to the church here at Campbell Road. We do love each other. And we have good relationships with each other. I love seeing the connections we have with one another, but don't get lazy. But don't stop. I need to ask myself, what can I do to grow in my love towards one another? Is there more I can do? Maybe showing that love more. Maybe reaching out in that love more. Is there more I can do to grow in my love for one another here? And you want to know some ideas? You could change where you sit. But I know you're not going to do that, so let's not even say that one. You could be hospitable. That's a great idea. Someone you don't know really well. Maybe there's someone new who's come to this congregation, and I don't even know who that is. Well, take them out to eat. One of the best times you get to know someone is sharing a meal, because in sharing a meal, the guard is down, the friendliness of the atmosphere is engaged, and you can really get to know someone just by taking them out for a meal and just asking questions about who they are. But I want to give you a challenge one of the shepherds helped me see through this lesson. On our website, you'll find our directory, and it looks a little bit like this. Here's a challenge from one of our shepherds. What if each of us took a responsibility, the personal responsibility to care for two people, the names above us and the names below us? See, above you, you'll be a name, there'll be a family, and below you is a family. If we each just took responsibility for the name above us and the name below us, we really got to know them, and then we were taking care of them, we were watching out for them, And so if they're needing something, we're right there. We know it, and we're taking care of them. If they need prayers or encouragement, I'm right there, and I'm there to help them and engage with them. If we did this, you know what's going to happen? We're going to get a lot closer, maybe with people we haven't spent a lot of time with. And then that myth of people falling through the cracks, we're helping the shepherds because we're engaged with the people above us and the people below us. Now, it might be your family members, so you can't do that. That's cheating. You have to go above your family members. That doesn't count. Or you might be the bottom of the list. You go back to the A's and Alberts. You got to go all the way to the Z's, buddy. You got to go all the way down. But do you get the challenge, though? What if we did that? 2 people, right? 2 families. We could do that. Amen? That's a great challenge. Can we do that? Print it off. 2 families. We have a whole year now. Let's come back this next December and see how that went. We can keep connected with people, grow in our relationships. The myth is big churches are unfriendly. Big churches have no close relationships. Let's break that myth. It's not true here. Not at this church. Not at this local family. Here's the second challenge. Ready? We got to keep active. Because that myth becomes reality when we start thinking, there's already so many people who are doing things, they just don't need me here. I'm going to sit back. It seems like everything's already working fine. I'm just going to kind of be here in the pew. If they need me, they'll come to me, but I really don't want to jump in because it seems like everything's already taken care of. Wrong. Wrong. Men here this morning, you may be new to this local congregation. You might have been here for a long time. We need to understand something. You will not serve here like you have served in other local congregations. It's probably not going to be the same. And so if in other congregations you led services on the stage every week or several times every month, it likely will not be the same here. That does not mean you're not needed. That does not mean there's not work for you to do. That does not mean that the work we need you to do is unimportant. We need to understand that. This is not the extent of the importance. This is not the curtain into the Holy of Holies here. This is one act of service to God. There's much more that's necessary in the work going on in this local congregation. So here's the thing. If you're here this morning and you're thinking, I haven't really been involved. I'm kind of waiting for the invitation. If they need me, they'll call me. If you're waiting for the invitation, here it is. Get active. Can you teach? Are you good at teaching? Are you good with kids? Little kids? High schoolers? Middle schoolers? Can you help them? Can you understand them? Are you a good listener? Are you good with words? Are you good with your hands? Are you good at inviting people in? You're good at bringing people in? Are you good at hosting studies? Can you do something to help us? Can you help our relationships in a way that maybe we haven't understood yet? Can you help us in our worship? Maybe helping us see something we haven't seen yet? Can you help us in our Bible classes? Can you help us in our VBS? Can you help us in our weekends? Can you do something to help us? See, Paul wrote and he says, we're different. He says, we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. But even though we're different, he says, let each exercise them accordingly. If you have prophecy, according to the proportion of his faith. If in service, in his serving, or he who teaches in his teaching, he who exhorts in his exhortation, he who gives with liberality, he who leads with diligence, he who shows mercy with cheerfulness. You see what he's saying? If you have a gift, use it. Don't sit on it. In fact, one of the great blessings of this local congregation is that this church is a young church. So many of us have young kids or grandkids who sit here. Parents, let me help you. Let me remind you, one of the things you can instill in your children here at this church is that we did not come here merely to be served, but to serve. Whatever that means. If there's a need, we're going to see how we can fill it. If there's a talent we have, we're going to see how we can use it. If there's something we can do in this congregation, we're not here merely to be served. We're here to offer out our talents and the service of this group and ultimately to the glory of God. And so I'm instilling in my kids who may not grow up here, who may leave here and attend in a different state at a different church that's not like this one. I need to get in their hearts service. I'm here to serve. However you need me. You don't have to beg. You don't have to plead. I'm already ready. I'm already volunteering. Whatever you need, I'm ready. Be active, brethren. What can I do to help this local congregation? All right, I want to end with 3 thoughts, and this lesson is going to be yours. 3 quick thoughts I had from this lesson. Number 1 is really important. God's words are more important than man's. And we know that. But we need to remember this, because I guarantee if you talk to someone who is familiar with the Lord and with the church, and you share with them information about the Campbell Road Church, they will have some things to say. Things to say about our size, things to say about our work. We need to care far less about the words of man and care far more about the words of God. Man's opinions are meaningless. God's thoughts are everything. Man does not determine the faithfulness of a local congregation. Man does not determine the rightness of a local congregation. It was not a man who stood in the midst of those candlesticks in Revelation 1. It was the Lord who bought it with his blood. And so when man says things about this local congregation, especially someone who's not a member here, I don't care about man's words. I care about God's. He's not the determination of my faithfulness. The King is. Care far less about man's words. Pay far more attention to God's. Here's number 2. They're great blessings. And I think we need to understand this. This subject can be so negative, and it tends to get that way. Why are you so big? Don't you all understand that that's not the way it ought to be? It gets so negative when you talk about this subject, but we need to spin that and realize, look, there's so many blessings, so many great blessings about being a part of a large congregation. Can I give you a few? And if you leave you a lot of space on your note card, but here's a few blessings. Like number 1, we have more classes. We have more adult classes. Can you believe it? We have 3 adult classes, and none of them are in the auditorium. That's a blessing. We have many kids' classes, and that doesn't mean we have a second grader in a class with a high schooler. Any of you grew up in something like that, where I did? You're teaching Romans to a second grader and a high schooler at the same time. You talk about dating to a second grader and a high schooler at the same time. We have so many classes, we have to divide up by age and grade. That's an amazing blessing, brethren. Isn't it incredible to offer that to our kids as they grow up and they're growing with their peers? And that means we have more teachers. It's not the same person teaching all year round. If you've been in a congregation where you're the perpetual teacher and you're not a preacher, you're always teaching and you get burned out, but you don't get to quit because you have to keep on teaching. But here, look at the talent we have. And the people who want to try. You don't have to try alone. People who will help you and engage with you, and we have hands-on people who are in there just to be the bodyguard or shepherd with those little kids, whatever you want to call it, the goalie. What a blessing to have that in a local congregation. We have more elders. And we have more deacons. That means we have more leadership, more voices of wisdom leading and guiding this flock. We have more servants doing more work in this local congregation. An incredible blessing not to take for granted. We have more ways to grow personally because of this larger congregation. There's all the things that this church provides, Bible classes, sermons, and all the special weekends. There's gospel meetings, there's ladies' studies, there's the blast weekend, the youth weekend, all sorts of things this church provides for you. But then there's individual things going on, the ladies' studies on Tuesday, individual house studies throughout the week, getting together one-on-one with someone who can mentor me and train me. There's more ways to grow personally for me individually in a larger church. There's more financial resources. Just by the fact when you have a larger church, that means usually more money, and that can be a great blessing. It can help us here. We're able to do more. And so when we run out of space, we're able to have another space for our kids to learn, another classroom wing. It means we can have things like a website. We can have things like cards or tracts to reach out in this community. But it also means we can support men in this country and around the world, many men, to help them preach the gospel. That's a blessing that comes from a larger congregation. There's more contacts in the community. You know why? Because there's more people here. And each of you know someone, a coworker, a neighbor, a friend, a family member. And thus simply by being bigger, we have more contacts, and thus that means more people are invited. If each of us are involved with this vein of thought, if each of us are involved in evangelism, since we each have a contact, more people are going to be invited in a smaller church. And that means there's the potential for more studies. And thus it really just means that there's more ways to help the gospel grow. More people, more ideas, more opportunities, more more resources to help us achieve this goal. And worship is more engaging. It's not to say that if you're in a smaller congregation, it's not. But when you have more voices, when you had what we had back in August, over 500 souls praising Jesus, when you have men from all over here in this local congregation, men who are just incredibly talented, some of the most talented men I've ever seen, leading, singing, offering thoughtful prayers, giving talks. Each of you could preach. You don't need this preacher. You could preach so well. Talented men all using their talents here in this local congregation. What a blessing. And then when we leave, there's going to be more smiles. There'll be frowns, but the likelihood is you're going to have more smiles because there are more bodies. That means there's going to be more hugs, more closeness. And there's more likelihood that there's people I can relate with. The newly married, the newly divorced, the new parents, the widow. With a larger congregation, there's a likelihood there's going to be someone who knows exactly what I'm going through. I've heard from some, when a church gets to a certain size, they ought to split. Swarm, maybe it's a correct term. Break off and start another group somewhere else. I don't agree. I can't imagine taking the good work that's going on here and cutting it in half. And saying half of you need to go somewhere else. Cutting our shepherds in half. Cutting our deacons in half. Cutting our preaching in half and saying that's going to be what's most effective in order to spread the gospel in this area. Look at the good that's being done here. Look at the blessings we have here. Because together, what God is doing through us as a large congregation. One more thought. We will make this church what it is. That's on us. We will make this local church what it is. Friendly, active, busy in evangelism, devoted to Bible teaching, real solid Bible teaching and preaching, loving, active in serving and caring for one another. We make this church what it is. There's a story we told earlier this year in our February focus about a little boy who was during the VBS, and they were all done. The kids were up front, and they were doing the little motions, building the church. Here's the church, and here's the steeple. But as soon as the teacher began, she realized the boy who was visiting couldn't do it because he only had one hand. Without missing a beat, though, the little girl sitting next to him reached over with her hand to match his hand. She goes, "Here, let's build the church together." And I love that story. I think we need to repeat that story. You know why? We build this church together. We build this church together. We will make this church inviting when we work together, when we build together. We will make this church active when we work together and build together. We will go out and reach the lost, not one, not two. We will reach the lost when we work and build together. And so if you've come this way, if you have come to this congregation, this local church, and you're beat down and you're weary and you're tired, let us help you. Let us strengthen you. Let us help you heal and grow. If you've come to this local congregation and you're looking to serve, you're looking to be active, you want somewhere where you can really work, let us help you because there's work for you. There's so much for you to do. Come to your shepherds. We want to put you to work. We'll make you active. We'll make you sweat. We'll put work in front of you. If you're here and maybe you're new, brand new to all of this, but you've come our way, we want to help you take those steps. We want you to keep on growing. We want to watch you mature and help you in your progress and your walk with God. Our prayer ought to be, brethren, that we grow, that the gospel is spread in this Garland community, that because of our efforts, more souls come, and from that, more souls are saved. But as they come, as to the Lord, if he indeed blesses us with opportunities and open doors, we will build this church into what it is. A church that is active, a church that is loving, a church that is devoted to the truth, but above all things, brethren, we exist here to glorify the King. That's why we're here. Big church, small church, we all exist wherever we are, all to the glory of God. Thank you so much for your listening so well. We're going to have a song and then a prayer, and then we'll be dismissed to our Bible classes. If you need help today, if you're visiting, finding classes, we have men in the back ready to help you. But stick around, study with us. We'll have a song and a prayer, and then we'll be dismissed.